The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly on Jake Harrison's weathered face as he surveyed the endless expanse of his family's ranch. What should have been rolling green pastures had transformed into a canvas of cracked earth and yellowing grass that crunched beneath his worn boots. The drought had been relentless this summer, turning his grandfather's dream into what felt more like a beautiful nightmare with each passing day. Jake removed his sweat-stained hat, running calloused fingers through dark hair that had begun showing premature streaks of silver at 34. The weight of 3 generations pressed heavily on his shoulders as he watched his cattle cluster around the few remaining water sources, their ribs becoming more visible each week. His grandfather had built this ranch from nothing after returning from World War II, and his father Samuel had expanded it into a thriving operation that once supported dozens of families in their small Kansas community. Now, Jake found himself the reluctant guardian of a legacy that seemed determined to slip through his fingers like the dusty soil beneath his feet. The bank statements on his kitchen table told a story he didn't want to accept. Mounting feed costs, veterinary bills, and a mortgage that grew hungrier each month, while his income dwindled like the water in his wells. The distant rumble of an unfamiliar truck engine broke through his melancholy thoughts. Jake shielded his eyes against the harsh afternoon glare, watching as a white pickup truck with veterinary decals navigated the rutted dirt road leading to his house. His jaw tightened involuntarily. He had called for help, but pride made every dollar spent on professional services feel like another small defeat. The truck came to a stop near the old barn, where his father Samuel was attempting to repair a broken gate, his movements slower now, but still determined at 67. Jake had hoped to handle this crisis on his own, the way Harrison men always had. But when 12 of his best breeding cows had fallen mysteriously ill overnight, stubbornness became a luxury he couldn't afford. The driver's door opened, and Jake felt his preconceived notions stumble slightly. Instead of the grizzled old-timer he had expected, a woman in her late 20s stepped out, her long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail beneath a well-worn baseball cap. Dr. Emma Rodriguez moved with confident efficiency as she gathered her equipment from the truck bed, her brown eyes already assessing the ranch with the sharp attention of someone who understood that every detail could matter. "Mr. Harrison," her voice carried a slight accent that spoke of heritage and hard work. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez. We spoke on the phone about your cattle." Jake nodded, suddenly aware of how he must look. Dirt-stained jeans, a torn shirt, and boots that had seen better decades. "I appreciate you coming out on such short notice, Dr. Rodriguez. I know your time is valuable, and I'll be honest, money's tight right now." Emma's expression softened slightly, and Jake caught a glimpse of understanding in her eyes that suggested she had heard similar admissions before. "Let's take a look at your animals first, Mr. Harrison. We can discuss payment arrangements after I understand what we're dealing with." As they walked toward the pasture where his sick cattle stood listlessly in whatever shade they could find, Jake found himself stealing glances at this unexpected veterinarian. There was something about the way she moved, purposeful but not hurried, confident without arrogance, that reminded him of his late mother, who had possessed that same ability to bring calm to chaos simply through her presence. "Tell me what you've observed," Emma said, pulling on latex gloves as they approached the first group of affected animals. "When did the symptoms start, and have you noticed any patterns?" Jake began recounting the timeline. The sudden lethargy, the loss of appetite, the way his usually robust cattle had become shadows of themselves overnight. As he spoke, he watched Emma examine each animal with gentle hands and keen eyes, murmuring soft words in both English and Spanish that seemed to reassure the distressed creatures. For the first time in months, Jake felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. This woman clearly knew her business, but more than that, she seemed to genuinely care about the animals under her attention. In a world where everything felt like it was falling apart, her competence felt like a lifeline he hadn't dared to expect. The Kansas wind picked up slightly, stirring the dust around their feet and carrying with it the promise of another scorching day ahead. But as Jake watched Dr. Emma Rodriguez work, he wondered if perhaps the harsh summer sun might finally be preparing to give way to something better. Emma Rodriguez knelt beside the fourth sick cow of the morning, her practiced hands moving gently along the animal's flank as she listened through her stethoscope. The irregular heartbeat and labored breathing painted a troubling picture that grew more complex with each examination. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of heat stress was revealing itself as something far more sinister. "This isn't what I expected to find," she murmured, more to herself than to Jake, who stood nearby with his arms crossed, watching every movement with the intensity of a man whose entire future hung in the balance of her diagnosis. Jake shifted his weight from one boot to the other, the leather creaking in the oppressive silence that stretched between them. "What do you mean? Is it worse than heat exhaustion?" Emma stood slowly, peeling off her examination gloves with deliberate care as her mind raced through possibilities. 20 years of veterinary education and 5 years of field experience had taught her to trust her instincts. And right now, those instincts were screaming warnings she didn't want to voice prematurely. The symptoms she was observing, the neurological signs, the digestive distress, the systematic organ stress, suggested something environmental rather than infectious. "I need to run some tests," she said finally, avoiding Jake's penetrating stare as she returned to her truck for sample collection supplies. "Blood work, tissue samples, water analysis. Until I have laboratory results, I can only treat the symptoms." The mention of water analysis made Jake's stomach clench with a new kind of dread. Water was already his most precious and scarce resource. If something was wrong with what little he had left, the implications would extend far beyond his current cattle losses. His wells were shared with 3 neighboring ranches, and contamination could devastate the entire local agricultural community. "How long for results?" Jake asked, following her back toward the affected animals. 72 hours for preliminary findings, maybe longer for comprehensive analysis," Emma replied, drawing blood from the least responsive cow with efficient movements. "In the meantime, I'm going to start them on supportive therapy, IV fluids, anti-inflammatory medication, and nutritional supplements." As Emma worked, Jake found himself studying her profile in the harsh midday light. There was something about her calm competence that both reassured and unnerved him. Most veterinarians he had dealt with over the years maintained professional distance, but Emma seemed genuinely invested in understanding not just the immediate medical crisis, but the broader context of his struggling operation. "You've been ranching long?" she asked, surprising him with the personal question as she moved to the next animal. "My whole life, 3rd generation on this land." Jake's voice carried pride despite the current circumstances. "My grandfather started with 40 acres and a handful of cattle after the war, built it up to what you see now." Emma nodded thoughtfully as she examined another cow's eyes, checking pupil response and looking for signs of systemic toxicity. "It's beautiful country. Hard to imagine anything more peaceful than those sunrises over the prairie." "Used to be," Jake said quietly. "Before the drought, before the bills started piling up, before—" He trailed off, surprised by his own candor with this woman he had met only hours ago. "Before everything changed," Emma finished gently, understanding threading through her voice in a way that suggested personal familiarity with upheaval and uncertainty. Their eyes met across the back of the sick cow, and Jake felt an unexpected jolt of connection that had nothing to do with veterinary services or business transactions. There was intelligence in Emma's dark eyes, but also compassion and something that looked suspiciously like recognition, as if she saw in his struggles a reflection of battles she had fought herself. "Dr. Rodriguez," Jake began, then caught himself. "Emma, can I ask you something?" She looked up from her sample collection, waiting. "In your professional opinion, off the record, am I looking at losing my entire herd?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hands still working methodically as she considered her response. When she finally spoke, her voice carried both honesty and hope. I've seen ranchers come back from worse, Jake. But I won't lie to you. If this is what I think it might be, we need to act fast and we need to be smart about it. The wind picked up again, carrying dust and the weight of uncertainty across the Harrison ranch. But for the first time since his troubles began, Jake felt like he might not be facing them entirely alone. 3 days later, Emma's truck kicked up familiar dust clouds as she returned to the Harrison ranch, laboratory results folded in her jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. The preliminary tests had confirmed her worst fears, but she had spent the entire drive rehearsing how to deliver news that could destroy everything Jake had left to hope for. She found him in the barn, replacing worn leather on an old saddle with the methodical patience of a man who had learned to find solace in working with his hands. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through gaps in the weathered wood caught the concentration etched across his features, and Emma felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with professional anxiety. "Jake?" Her voice carried more softness than she had intended. He looked up, and she saw in his eyes the same mixture of hope and dread that she had witnessed in countless clients over the years. But this time, something deeper twisted in her stomach. Somewhere between Monday's initial examination and today's return visit, Jake Harrison had stopped being just another client and had become someone whose pain would keep her awake at night. "You have the results," he said, setting down his tools and giving her his full attention. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded, pulling the papers from her pocket but not yet unfolding them. "Jake, I need to ask you about your water sources, all of them. Wells, streams, any irrigation you might be using." His jaw tightened slightly. "Why?" "Because what's affecting your cattle isn't natural. The toxin levels in their blood indicate deliberate contamination of your water supply." Emma watched his face carefully as she delivered the devastating news. "Someone has been systematically poisoning your ranch." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a wildfire, acrid and suffocating. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Emma saw a flash of rage cross his features before it was replaced by something that looked dangerously close to defeat. "Who would do something like that?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet, but Jake, this isn't just about your ranch. If someone is contaminating water sources, other operations in the area could be affected too. We need to contact the authorities, run tests on neighboring properties." Jake shook his head slowly, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Emma was beginning to recognize as his response to overwhelming pressure. "Emma, I can't afford a legal battle. Hell, I can barely afford to feed my remaining cattle. If word gets out that my water is poisoned, that my land might be toxic, I'll never recover from this." Emma stepped closer, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his arm in comfort. "And if we don't investigate, whoever is doing this will keep doing it. How many other ranchers are going to lose everything while we stay silent?" The barn fell quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the eaves. Emma studied Jake's profile as he stared out toward his pastures, seeing the war being waged between his survival instincts and his moral compass. "There's something else," she said softly. "I've been offered a position at a large animal clinic in Denver. Better pay, more resources, partnership track." She paused, surprised by how difficult the next words were to say. "I'm supposed to give them an answer by Friday." Jake turned to look at her then, and Emma saw something shift in his expression. "That's a good opportunity for you." "It is," she agreed, though her voice lacked conviction. "But it would mean leaving right when you need help most." Their eyes met in the dusty golden light, and Emma felt the weight of a choice she hadn't expected to face. Stay and fight beside a man who was beginning to mean more to her than professional ethics should allow, or take the safe path toward a secure future that suddenly felt hollow and cold. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the focus on her microscope, examining water samples she had secretly collected from 3 neighboring ranches. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The same toxic compounds that were destroying Jake's cattle were present in every sample, but in a pattern that defied natural contamination. Someone wasn't just poisoning one ranch, they were systematically targeting the entire agricultural corridor. The veterinary clinic was empty at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, giving Emma the privacy she needed to conduct her unauthorized investigation. She had lied to her supervisor about working late on routine paperwork, but the weight of what she was uncovering felt far more important than professional protocols. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about what you said. Are you sure about the contamination?" Emma stared at the message, torn between the urge to comfort him and the growing certainty that they were dealing with something much larger and more dangerous than either of them had imagined. Instead of responding immediately, she turned back to her research, pulling up property records and recent sales data for their region. The pattern that emerged made her stomach drop. Over the past 18 months, 7 family ranches in their county had been sold to the same development company, Wheeler Enterprises. All 7 had experienced mysterious cattle deaths or crop failures in the months leading up to their sales. All 7 had sold for fractions of their actual value. Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard as she dug deeper into Wheeler Enterprises. Marcus Wheeler, the company's founder, had made his fortune buying distressed agricultural properties and converting them into suburban developments. But his success rate in acquiring struggling ranches seemed statistically impossible unless he had inside information about their problems or was creating those problems himself. Her phone rang, startling her from her research. Jake's name appeared on the screen. "Emma, something's happened." His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Someone cut my fence lines tonight, scattered my remaining healthy cattle across 3 counties. It's going to take days to round them up, and some of them..." He paused, and Emma could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Some of them are already lost. Jake, listen to me," Emma said, making a decision that she knew would change everything. "I know who's doing this to you, to all of you. But if I'm right, we're not just dealing with sabotage. We're dealing with a criminal conspiracy that involves multiple ranches and probably millions of dollars in fraudulent land deals." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Emma wondered if the call had dropped. When Jake finally spoke, his voice carried a dangerous edge she hadn't heard before. "Tell me everything," he said. "And Emma, that job in Denver can wait. We have work to do." As Emma began explaining her discoveries, she realized she had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. She was no longer just a veterinarian treating sick cattle. She had become a co-conspirator in what felt like a war for the soul of rural Kansas. The confrontation came at dawn on Friday morning, just as Emma and Jake were photographing contaminated water samples near the eastern boundary of his property. Marcus Wheeler arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of drought-stricken prairie grass. "Dr. Rodriguez," Wheeler's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I understand you've been conducting some unauthorized research on private property." Emma felt Jake tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle mounted in his truck. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, her touch both calming and electric in the charged atmosphere. "Mr. Wheeler," she replied evenly, "I've been treating sick animals. That's what veterinarians do." Wheeler's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Indeed, though I'm curious why a talented veterinarian like yourself would waste time on a failing operation when there are so many opportunities elsewhere. I believe you recently received an offer from Mountain View Animal Hospital in Denver." The casual mention of her job offer sent ice through Emma's veins. Wheeler, knowing about her personal business, meant he had been watching her, investigating her, treating her as a threat rather than a professional doing her job. "That's none of your business." Jake stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, everything that happens in this county is my business. I have investments to protect, projects to complete, and frankly, your little conspiracy theories are becoming quite inconvenient." Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her clinic supervisor. "Need to see you immediately. Serious allegations about your conduct." Wheeler noticed her checking her phone, and his smile widened. Professional troubles, Dr. Rodriguez. How unfortunate. I imagine it would be difficult to practice veterinary medicine with a damaged reputation. The pieces clicked together in Emma's mind with terrifying clarity. Wheeler wasn't just poisoning cattle and destroying ranches. He was systematically dismantling anyone who tried to expose him. Her supervisor had received complaints about her conduct, probably accompanied by fabricated evidence and witness statements. "You can't scare us into silence," Emma said, though her voice betrayed the fear she was trying to hide. "I don't need to scare you, Doctor. I just need to make you irrelevant." Wheeler gestured toward his associates, who began spreading out in a pattern that suggested professional security training. "Mr. Harrison, your final foreclosure notice will be served Monday morning. Dr. Rodriguez, I suggest you focus on salvaging what's left of your career rather than playing detective." As Wheeler and his men departed, leaving behind only dust and threats, Emma felt the weight of their situation settle over her like a burial shroud. They had 48 hours before Jake lost everything, and her own professional life was already under attack. The evidence they had gathered felt suddenly fragile against Wheeler's wealth and influence. "Emma," Jake's voice was quiet but determined. "If we're going to do this, it has to be now, before he destroys us completely." She looked into his eyes and saw her own resolve reflected back. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Saturday evening found Emma and Jake in the old barn, surrounded by boxes of evidence, legal documents, and the quiet determination of people who had nothing left to lose. Samuel Harrison sat in his worn leather chair, his weathered hands steady as he helped organize water sample reports that would either save their community or destroy their lives. "The FBI agent will be here at sunrise," Emma said, checking her phone for the third time in 10 minutes. "Agent Patricia Mills specializes in environmental crimes and corporate fraud. She's driven down from Kansas City specifically for this." Jake nodded, his attention focused on a map where they had marked every affected property with red pins. The pattern was undeniable now. A deliberate circle of contamination designed to force sales to Wheeler Enterprises. 17 ranches, Emma, 17 families whose lives he destroyed for profit. The weight of their discovery had brought together an unlikely alliance. Emma's former supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Chen, had arrived that afternoon with her own evidence. Wheeler had attempted to bribe her into filing false reports about Emma's competence. 3 neighboring ranches had quietly joined their cause, bringing testimony about mysterious cattle deaths and pressure to sell. Even the local bank president had provided documents showing Wheeler's suspicious pattern of swooping in with cash offers immediately after ranch failures. As the first hints of dawn began painting the eastern sky, Emma found herself standing beside Jake on the front porch of the ranch house, watching for Agent Mills's arrival. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden grass dancing in the morning breeze that carried the promise of rain for the first time in months. "Jake," Emma said softly, "whatever happens today, I want you to know that choosing to stay here, to fight this fight with you, it's the best decision I've ever made." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw not just gratitude, but something deeper and more permanent. "Emma Rodriguez, you saved more than my ranch. You saved me." The distant rumble of vehicles approaching interrupted their moment, but neither moved away from the other. Federal agents, state investigators, and news crews would soon transform their quiet morning into controlled chaos. Wheeler's empire would crumble under the weight of evidence they had gathered, and justice would finally reach this forgotten corner of Kansas. But for now, in the precious silence before the storm of media attention and legal proceedings, Jake reached for Emma's hand and found it waiting for his. The sun climbed higher over the Harrison Ranch, painting everything in warm gold light that made the drought-stressed land look almost beautiful again. His Kansas herd would graze again, Jake murmured, watching as his surviving cattle moved peacefully across pastures that would soon be cleaned and restored. And her laughter would light up this ranch house for years to come. Emma smiled, squeezing his hand as the first FBI vehicle turned into their driveway. The future stretched ahead of them like the endless prairie sky, uncertain but filled with possibility, and best of all, they would face it together.